they subsequently set on fire, preventing those inside from leaving. Then the terrorists moved towards the Russian-Ukrainian border and were detained there. As a result of the terrorist attack, people were killed. I understand that it's impossible just to draw such parallels, but life, it does that. 149 people died. In Khatyn on the 22nd of March, 149 people died. Among the killed, the Russian Foreign Ministry employee, first-class specialist of the Department of Linguistics Support, Tatiana Repina, she was among the killed, and more than 600 people suffered injuries. Of course, our sorrow is with the families and friends of those who were affected by this horrible crime. Russian competent authorities have established the circumstances of the preparation of the terrorist attack. They have detained the accomplices. All of them appeared in court that delivered its verdict on the 12th of March this year. 11 accomplices were sentenced to life imprisonment. Another received 22 years imprisonment and 6 months, and 3 received 9 years and 11 months. The purpose was destabilization of political situation in our country. It confirms the terrorist nature of the Kiev regime, for which such methods have long become normal. Just look at the immoral action on the anniversary of this tragedy in the concert hall. This hellish flash mob launched by one of restaurants in Ukraine. The visitors are offered. Just have courage to listen to that all, because we must tell the international audience about what is now happening in Ukraine. So the visitors, on the day of the anniversary of the tragedy, at the Ukrainian restaurant, they were offered to mark this incredibly funny event, and those who ordered a set of hors d'oeuvre that was called Crocus City, they were offered 4 glasses, small glasses. But you know why 4? Because it's the number of terrorists. So this PR campaign was qualified as a way of celebration of this murder. It's not some part of a horror film. It's not some prohibited part of a telephone video of someone who is sick, who is a maniac. It's in the center of this state that gets multi-billion aid in weapons and money. At the restaurant, they offer a menu to honor those who have killed tons and tons of civilians. Yes, it's just difficult to qualify that in words. It's just not evil acts, it's just sickness. And a crime, of course, because it does not fit into the moral norms and humanity. It's just inhumane. It's just beastly actions. And such ideas, they could appear only, yes, any ideas could appear in different heads and different communities. It's the issue of relationship of society to that, the relationship within the state. So such ideas, they bloom completely without any condemnation, only where hatred and inhumane Nazi ideology thrive. It's not against some specific person, it's just the situation, hatred, in general, is a condition of a soul. It's not just cynical mockery of the memory of the killed. It's just glorification of terrorists and their methods in the context of the sad anniversary of the events at Crocus City Hall and the sentencing of the perpetrators and accomplices of this terrorist attack. We know that the threats posed by international terrorist and extremist organizations, primarily ISIL, Al-Qaeda and associated groups, continue to escalate and to evolve. Risks grow of weapons and munitions subsequently spreading to neighboring regions. From Ukraine, Russia consistently advocates strengthening the UN Central Coordinating role and building the established international legal framework, abandoning double standards and hidden agendas, and not allowing the use of those problems, as well as terrorist groups themselves, as a tool of geopolitics and interference in international affairs. Our country supports the strengthening of counterterrorism cooperation with all constructively minded states, including within the dynamically multilateral developing forums as the CSTO, CIS, BRICS, and SCO. The surge in terrorism worldwide in recent years is largely provoked by Western interference in the international internal affairs of sovereign states, primarily Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan. It's about the Westerners politicizing the counter-terrorism agenda, using double standards. They do not consider terrorism an absolute evil and do not adhere to a zero-tolerance policy towards it. For them, it's a tool for pursuing neo-colonial policy, pressuring sovereign states and ensuring their own dominance. Russia finds it unacceptable, and we will continue to fight this evil with all the available means. In Ukraine, we are witnessing Westerners deploying terrorists and extremists to achieve their own geopolitical objectives. Nurtured by their Euro-Atlantic curators, the terrorists just commit their crimes, destroying civilian infrastructure and killing civilians. The Kiev regime employs terrorist methods itself and cooperates with international terrorist groups, also for fighting against legitimate governments, particularly, as I have already mentioned, today in Africa, on the African continent. Ukraine has been turned into a true logistical hub from where Western weapons are distributed throughout the world, falling into the hands of both criminals and terrorists. And what is now happening in Ukraine? On the 27th of March, the report will be presented Dr. Mengele of the Kiev regime at the Россия Сегодня press center. The Kiev regime is just doing its best to copy its idols from the Third Reich. The report has been prepared by the International Public Tribunal under the chairmanship of Maxim Grigoriev. It's yet another confirmation of this vicious practice. I would remind you that the name of Dr. Josef Mengele has become a common word for inhumane experiments. He conducted them on prisoners in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And after the Nuremberg Tribunal It has become a synonym for sadism, cruelty, inhumane treatment of prisoners, and a complete disregard for medical ethics, as well as basic principles of humanism and morality. By the most modest estimates, his victims number in tens of thousands. It would seem that such inhumane crimes should have been left in the last century, along with all the horrors perpetrated by the Nazis and their collaborators. But the testimonies from prisoners, they testify to the contrary. The Nazi essence of the Kiev regime is just actively demonstrated love for the symbols of the Third Reich and also the inhumane treatment of the wounded. The details recounted by Russian servicemen who returned from capacity are capable of horrifying even the most hardened cynics. For the second time today, I would ask you to be courageous to hear all that. For those people who are not prepared, it will not be simple. I mean, amputation without anesthesia, deliberately inflicting pain by inserting medical instruments into wounds, using prisoners for training exercise for medical students, striking broken bones. It has become a routine, unfortunately, for many Ukrainian doctors. I do not know to what extent this word is applicable here, but those medical workers, they have clearly forgotten the Hippocratic oath. They just exchanged it to the Joseph Mengele oath. All the facts presented in this report are not just some accidental cases. It's not just one-off case. It's a manifestation of inhumane, endless, sadistic tendencies, not of a single doctor, but it's systemic phenomenon now. Obviously, it's not about single cases, some specific persons. No. It has become a pandemic for doctors in Ukraine who are allowed to treat prisoners of war. It's a systemic phenomenon, I would repeat, and it's being supported at such a level, in such a format, by the Kiev regime. They are aware about that, and they consider it an absolute norm and do nothing about that. But not all doctors in Ukraine just are ready to ignore the norms of humanity, but of course not. But the number of those who participate in that sadistic bacchanal, it's just shocking. And doctors mentioned that they were prohibited from giving painkillers to prisoners of war. According to the Geneva Convention on Vancouver, have they not heard about such a document? The treatment of prisoners of war, it should always... I don't know how to put it. It sounds banal. Everyone is aware of that, remembered, and many generations, they know that, they have known that prisoners of war should be treated humanely. Any unlawful act resulting in the death of a prisoner of war in the custody of a country or seriously endangering a prisoner's health, they are prohibited and must be considered as a grave breach of the Convention. No physical or mental torture or other coercive measures may be applied to prisoners of war. But atrocities against Russian prisoners of war constitute war crimes that have no statute of limitations. So everyone will be responsible for that. Ukrainian leaders, heads of Ukrainian medical institutions who gave criminal orders to those doctors who carried out those crimes. On the 27th of March, it will be GIMO diplomas presented to veterans of the special military operations who participated in the program of additional training, urban infrastructure and territorial development manager Sergei Lavrov will preside this ceremony, and among the honored guests will be the State Secretary and Deputy Minister of Defense Anna Tsivilova, GIMO Rector Anatoly Torkonov, Head of the Main Directorate of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Fatin, and heads of the regions will be attending. Those who have sent students to that program. The 2-month training took place at GIMO's Odintsova branch. 29 veterans participated from St. Petersburg, Vladimir, Kaluga, Leningrad, Lipetsk, Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, Novgorod-Orbsk, Pskov, Ryazan, Smolensk, Tver, Tula, and Yaroslavl regions. It was not only for career military personnel, but civilian professions, economists, engineers, medical workers, and many other professionals. This program, at the request of Sergei Lavrov, includes 7 training modules, independent project work, practical training at infrastructure facilities in Moscow and Moscow region. Today, it's a major in-person program for special military operation veterans, and in the current conditions when high demands are before the civil servants, it's the combat experience and psychological fortitude of patriotism will be in demand in regional and municipal governments. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and its subordinate institutions will continue to contribute to the implementation of Vladimir Putin's directive to train highly qualified managers from among the special military operations veterans. They will continue to serve their fatherland in a new field.
Now another topic, situation in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. We have a lot of questions received, and we try to answer them as time goes. We have seen the questions from Kommersant, Izvestia, Al-Mayadin, Posolskaya Жизнь, and other editions regarding the situation in the Middle East and different speculations in regards to the US-Iran negotiation process and the further escalation of the conflict and possible mediatory efforts to restore peace to the region. Since there have been a lot of questions with a common topic, we prepared a complex response. A new stage of U.S.-Israeli aggression has started against the backdrop of negotiations between the sides. Tehran has accomplished and has been accomplishing their part of work in good faith, and it turned out that Washington used this as cover-up for the start of the war, and this is discreditation of diplomacy. It's obvious now that the conflict is developing not according to the initial blueprint, and perhaps there's another call for negotiations is intended to create more fruitful environment for the continuation of the strikes. Our principal position has not changed. We think that negotiations are the only reason, on the only resolution to end the crisis, which has involved not only the Middle East but the entire world. The crisis, which has a tendency to, unfortunately, woefully, to be spread along geographical frontiers and nuclear catastrophe, caused Russia to call on a swift end to violence and sustainable dialogue to reach sustainable peace in the region. We are intrinsically ready to support it. Regarding the fate of the nuclear material amassed by Iran, the NPT, neither the NPT nor the agreement with the IAEA do not, and I once again underline the fact that they do not set any limits to the amount of nuclear material in possession of non-nuclear states that they are manufacturing, and there are no limits in regards to the enrichment process as long as this process is controlled by the IAEA. So only voluntary measures on the part of Tehran are possible without any infringement upon the sovereign rights of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Only Iran has the right to dispose of their nuclear material as they see fit. Another aspect of a topic that we regularly commenting about, and we are providing speedy replies to the questions. Our representatives and ambassadors and permanent representatives at the international organizations make statements in that regard, provide evaluation of the unfortunately only growing crisis that we're witnessing before our eyes. I will not repeat myself, but in one aspect I would like to have some addition. During the strikes of March strikes of the US against Iran, many UNESCO sites included in the list of World Heritage sites have been damaged, including the Palace of Golestan in Tehran and the Mechet Jame, Palace of Chehil Sotun, and the components of the Meydan Imam Square. On the 2nd of March, the Internet portal of UNESCO published the statement condemning the destruction in Iran without mentioning any initiators or participants of the conflict, and calling on all sides, very interestingly, to abide by the UN Convention on the Preservation of the World Cultural and Natural Heritage of 1972 and the Hague Convention on Protection of Cultural Valuables in case of armed conflict of 1954. On March 11th, the director of the Center of World Heritage of UNESCO, Lazar Elundo Asomo, and the press secretary of the Organization on the Issues of Culture and Priority Africa, Munia Givano, have made a statement against this damage to the cultural heritage of the entirety of the Middle East and Iran. The American-Israeli aggression against Iran already led multiple fatalities and a lot of suffering. Children are dying. The healthcare system is suffering. Thousands of people have been left without shelter and were forced to leave their homes. The region is threatened by a very real environmental catastrophe. Against the backdrop of those tragedies, we shouldn't forget about the real danger of destruction of our worldwide heritage, our cultural heritage. Everything that forms us as a civilization is cultural and historical diversity and is a material manifestation of the history of mankind. On December 29, 1947, back in 1947, while making a statement during the opening of the Rerich paintings exhibition, first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, mentioned that the Russian painter and thinker tried, even before the start of the Second World War, tried to initiate a multilateral covenant to protect cultural valuables. But as he himself admitted, Mr. Nehru, he said that such agreements are quickly forgotten during wars. We have relevant conventions right now, not the multilateral documents. However, as the events in Iran show, a threat to lose the unique masterpieces of the past forever has not gone anywhere. Due to the protracted conflict in the Persian Gulf region, there is still a risk of destruction of the most ancient edifices that we have inherited from the past generations, and it's our duty to preserve them for posterity, for our children and grandchildren to have the opportunity to touch the cultural heritage, for so that no one would be able to tell them that their history doesn't exist. And it's our duty to preserve this heritage. On our side, we will continue to monitor the developments with the situation of the cultural historical sites in Iran on the relevant international platforms. I will especially underline something for those that people are killed, and you are talking about monuments. Every day we are making corresponding statements condemning the civilian casualties. We already made a statement today about a blatant murder, massacre, unprovoked aggression against children, women, and peaceful civilian population. In this case, the civilian suffering is has our undivided attention. We need to use every opportunity to stop this monstrous bloodshed. But it's important to look at all the aspects of this tragedy, especially to have the whole mindlessness and inadmissibility of the situation. Today we talk about the history of those times of the Second World War and the Great Patriotic War, and I am convinced that some will say that perhaps you should be commenting on the relevant news. You are commenting news, but why do you have so much history in your reports? I will prove to you that there can be too much history, and I will explain why it is so important to know your history. It's important to know it because on the 16th of March in Riga, in the very center of the city, there was a traditional, what do you think happened as per tradition? Not the spring festival, not a flower festival. There was a march of former legionaries of Waffen SS and their fans from the number of the representatives of the local nationalist radical organizations. And among the participants of this congregation, there have been high-ranking Latvian officials, deputies of the same, representative of the mayor's office and the local government from among the right-wing radical parties, from the same people that love to criticize our country. And just look at how it all turns out. They are ready to accuse the other, but they don't notice their own faults. We see this event intended to glorify former SS members as direct abuse of memory of those who have lost their lives trying to save the Mir from the brown plague. The heroes, in quote-unquote, that they have glorified have taken part directly in the murder of Jewish people in the territory of the Latvian SSR and also conducted punitive operations in the territories of the Russian SSR, the Belarus SSR, and Poland without discrimination and not even pitying children, women, or the elderly. Once again, the Latvian authorities are appeasing this situation, and they are trying to put an equation sign between those who attacked and destroyed and those who were attacked, and nevertheless tried to liberate their own land and the entirety of the world. I'd like to point out once again that evidence of the spread of Nazi ideas in the Baltic states with the support of the authorities have been highlighted in the MFA reports 80 years after the Great Victory. The shadow of Nazism has covered Europe once again, and on the situation in some countries of Europe surrounding the destruction and desecration of memorials erected for those who fought Nazism in the years of the Second World War, that have been published on our website. And also this topic was mentioned in the regular reports of the MFA, such as on the situation with the glorification of Nazism, spread of neo-Nazism, and other practices serving to escalate the modern form of racism and racial discrimination, xenophobia, and other forms of intolerance. We condemn the continued neo-fascist bacchanalia in the Baltic region. Fascism didn't end in 1945, and it met met an end in 1945, and now there is no future for any of its adherents. Any attempts to rewrite history and to glorify Nazi collaborators are cynical and inadmissible. Our country is defending the truth about the Second World War, and we are decisively preventing any attempts to rehabilitate Nazism, no matter where they are undertaking. Today, those who are still marching against under those banners should remember that the retaliation is inevitable, and all the patrons of such manifestations are leading them into a political and moral abyss. And in the neighboring Baltic state, we saw the similar practice, perhaps not a costume party this time, but doing something close to that in the modern sense of the word. Now a couple of words about the surprising in its stupidity initiative of the Lithuanian this time authorities to ban entry to Lithuania to those performers that have been performing in Russia and Belarus since February 24th, 2022 for a term of up to 5 years. Once again, this confirms the commitment of the Lithuanian authorities to an uncompromised Russophobic stance and the maniacal desire of local elites to block any opportunities for their own citizens to get an alternative information on Russia and its culture. This is just drowning in ignorance that we are witnessing in the Baltic countries, and especially in Lithuania. We are forced to state that the anti-Russian hysteria of Vilnius is taking more and more ugly shapes. The measures undertaken by local authorities to introduce a sort of a quarantine for Russian culture is now supplemented by bans on those who hasn't joined the Russophobic craze and didn't subject itself to the canceling campaign against our country and everything that is Russian. And perhaps the Lithuanians thought that Russian culture would be quickly banned and cancelled in the West, and Russian history would be banned and cancelled, and that would become an around the world phenomena. But this doesn't come to pass. Either they decided to do this themselves, or they received a corresponding order to do something locally. Such conduct by Lithuanian authorities are testament to their fear and mistrust towards their own compatriots. Perhaps they are really fearing that watching Russian performers and that are continuing to seep through the obstructions raised by Vilnius would raise a threat from the east and will nullify the efforts of all local Russophobes to cancel and demolish the remnants of Russian culture. You shouldn't fear that, because this will happen anyway. This will all happen anyway. And the coming generations of the Baltic states will, in one way or another, find out which deplorable role was played by the preceding regime in their countries, implementing the worst possible practices inherited from Nazism, racism, and other different types of xenophobia. There are other examples how you can preserve your own culture and nevertheless develop cultural diversity, equally paying attention to the linguistic diversity of the population, of the majority or the minority, the indigenous people's languages, how one can respectfully develop this coexistence of different cultures and the people that are talking in different language, speaking different languages, and do this harmoniously for the benefit of all current and future generations. There have been a lot of questions in regards of what is being done in our country to preserve the language heritage of the indigenous peoples of the Russian Federation will prepare an answer. And I think that this is a good counterexample of how other countries and Western countries, while they are conducting these cancel campaigns, erasure of identities, and we are doing the other thing. As you know, the UN has declared the decade of 2022-2032 an international decade of the indigenous peoples' languages. One of the priorities of the national plan of events on conducting this decade is the digitalization of the language and cultural heritage of national minorities and indigenous peoples. In the context of the efforts taken to preserve the languages of the peoples of the Russian ethnicities of the Russian Federation, the House of the Russian Peoples is ensuring the creation of the corpus of mother tongues, that is parallel text in different languages, to be included into the Yandex Translate service. Currently, 18 languages have been included into that service, and the neural network technology to synthesize and detect this language is being developed for the Bashkir, Mari, and Chuvash languages. Also, the Russian online encyclopedia RuWiki is being also supported in the languages. For example, 20 languages of Russia that have 1.5 million articles written in each of them. Also, we are working on the creation of an international portal on the indigenous languages. The digitalization of the languages of indigenous people is facing different difficulties related to the technical aspects, financial aspects, and legal and social character. It's one of the difficulties linked to the fact that the Unicode does not include around 40 symbols that are being used in the languages of the peoples of the Russian Federation. In this, the Russian company Paratype created different types and typefaces for the extended Cyrillic script for more than 150 languages and dialects, including the indigenous peoples' languages of the indigenous peoples of Russia. Also, there are new projects being implemented on development of the language diversity and support of indigenous peoples of Russia in the national internet domain zone.rf. Since August 2025, the .rf domain has been supplemented by the capability of registering the use of websites with the use of 26 additional Cyrillic characters, being part of 18 state languages of the entities of the Russian Federation: the languages of Adygea, Abazin, the Altaic, Bashkir, Buryat, Ingush, Kabardin and Cherkess, Kalmyk, Komi, Mari, Tatar, Tuvan, and Udmurt, Hakas, Chechen, Chuvash, Ossetin, and Yakut, and other languages. The key is to provide them full-fledged access to the internet resources on their mother languages.
Now, about pushing out of those unwanted alternative, call them as you may, and I would call them free journalists from the Western media space. Yet again, we have to draw your attention to the continued practice of putting pressure on the Russian journalists. Now we're talking about the actions of the EU that cannot be called anything but political impunity. This time, the Austrian authorities distinguished themselves. They initiated the procedure to revoke accreditation from the TASS bureau head in Vienna, Maxim Cherevik, with consequent de facto pushing him out of this country. As we learned, the journalist received the notification from the agency of the Federal Chancellor of Austria in charge of the work with foreign journalists, among other things. The document reads the cancellation of his journalist accreditation with a requirement to return the irrelevant press card. The basis for the procedure is claimed to be the results of some routine security check ostensibly conducted after the Russian journalists applied to participate in the 32nd session of OSCE Council of Foreign Ministers in Vienna on December 4th through 5th, 2025. We noted the fact that the wording of this notification also word by word copies the similar notifications received in 2024, the test journalists Irina Davidyan and Ivan Popov. Back then, it resulted in the official refusal by Austria to extend their resident permits and their consequent expulsion from the country. This operation, the Austrians conducted despite the existing press accreditation of Russian correspondents at the UN office in Vienna. At the same time, we see awkward attempts of the Austrian side to present it as the consequences of some technical procedures and checks. This shows at the very least cynical. How many times should we send new journalists to Vienna? Once a year? What is the time frame here? Let's call a spade a spade. De facto, we're talking about a targeted expulsion of a particular journalist for his professional activities. We see these actions as conscious and politically motivated pressure on the Russian media, as well as the serious violation of the international obligations of Austria, including within the OSCE, to ensure freedom of expression and indiscriminatory access to information. This practice is nothing more than the cleansing of the information space from alternative points of view that is conducted via political censorship. The Austrian authorities should realize their responsibility for the degradation for the situation in the freedom of media and draws relevant conclusions. It's Austria that expels Russian journalists, persecutes them, impedes their work systemically, and doing the same things time and time again. And Russia reserves the right to respond to this if they don't change their behavior. An important work was conducted by the Union of Journalists of Russia about the research that they conducted. You know that during our briefings and in a larger diplomatic work, we regularly talk about unjust, dishonest, and politically biased approach of various international human rights structures to respond to the facts of crimes of international humanitarian law, including when it comes to attacks and terror attacks against Russian journalists and other media employees. In this context, this report that was prepared by the Union of Journalists of Russia shows the selectiveness in registering the violent deaths of journalists that is seen in a set of seemingly authoritative international structures. This work, detailed work, was conducted by the Union of Journalists. They started the publicly available materials of the International NPO Committee to Protect Journalists. They analyzed these materials thoroughly and in an unbiased manner. They looked into the methodology that it used, and they draw a conclusion that in 2025, this method was used asymmetrically in cases of incidents with journalists, depending on what side of the line of conduct they fulfill their professional duty. We will provide the link to this report. We'll use it and translate it into the various languages. We'll spread it among the relevant international platforms and send to all international organizations in charge of ensuring security for media and journalists. We received a lot of questions asking to comment on the exercises at the Korean Peninsula. We witnessed escalation of tensions on the Korean Peninsula in south of the peninsula since March 9th through 19th. The U.S. and the Republic of Korea held regular joint military exercises, freedom of shield. Officially, they were claimed to be of defensive nature. However, judging on the contents of the events that they trained and the use of military equipment, these maneuvers are nothing but open preparation to war. It is clear that such military activity of Washington and Seoul don't contribute to reduction of tensions. This won't help to reframe the situation to the political and diplomatic track settlement. While the ruling elites in the U.S. and the Republic of Korea seek more military pressure and sanctions on Pyongyang, we won't see any possibility of positive chances on the Korean Peninsula. We are sure that the only total abandonment of aggressive steps and the account of concerns of the North Korea can lead to more security, long-lasting peace in this region. On March 23rd, during the official visit to the Russian Federation of Prime Minister of the Government of Social Republic of Vietnam, Pham Minh Thien, and an intergovernmental agreement on cooperation in building the first nuclear power plant on the territory of Vietnam with the participation of Rosatom State Corporation was signed. The agreement lays a legal framework to implement a large-scale project, including the construction of 2 energy units designed by Russia, the maintenance, supplies of fuel and staff training. Rosatom has all the necessary expertise. It has built 41 energy units in 11 countries. The building of the first nuclear power plant will help ensure an energy security of Vietnam and will give a powerful impetus to expanding cooperation in adjacent regions. One more event that took place, I'll tell you briefly. You'll learn more about it from our social networks. We will give more detailed information there on March 24th, the Diplomatic Academy of MGIMO University hosted a scientific and diplomatic symposium marking 250 years since the birthday of an outstanding diplomat and statesman of Russia and Greece, Ioannis Kapodistrias. Welcoming remarks to guests of the conference were sent by Foreign Minister Russia Sergei Lavrov. The event was participated by Russian and Greek public figures, representatives of the societies of friendship and researchers. During his service in the Russian MFA, as the close ally of Emperor Alexander II, he helped build sustainable international relations on the European continent. Ioannis Kapodistria promoted the development of Russia-Greece ties. It is symbolic that diplomatic relations were established between the countries on 1828 when he was the governor of the Greek state, but until Greece was fully recognized as independent from the Ottoman Empire, we deem it useful such events to be held. In our on March 29th, we will celebrate 35 years in the establishment of diplomatic relations between Russia and Panama. Our relationships go back quite a lot of time. One of the examples of our good relations is the passage of Soviet submarines from the Pacific Ocean Fleet to protect Arctic convoys of the Allies in 1982. In the memory of this event in 2025, a monument was erected. It became the first and the only memorial to the Soviet submarine officers in Latin America. We always talked and supported the neutrality of this legal status of the Panama Canal enshrined in the treaty concerning its permanent neutrality and operation of 1977 and protocol to which we understand that ties between Russia and Panama is of huge potential, and we unlock this potential through constructive political dialogue, building up interparliamentary and interagency contacts, expansion of scientific and educational and academic exchanges, cultural and humanitarian cooperation in general. We value Panama as a promising trade and economic partner of Russia with unique geography, develop trade and finance infrastructure. We're convinced that we have new possibilities ahead of us for multidimensional interaction of mutual interests for the good of Russian and Panama peoples. We congratulate our friends from Panama on this wonderful date. There's one more date. We talked about it this year. The main theater of Russia, the State Academic Bolshoi Theater, celebrates its 250th anniversary. The day of the foundation of the Bolshoi Theater is March 1776, when the provincial prosecutor, Prince Petro Rusev, received the permission of Empress Catherine II to keep the theater performances of any kind, as well as concert and masquerade. End of quote. The Bolshoi Theater contributed significantly to developing international ties through concert tours, implementation of joint projects, organization of educational programs, and broadcasting of performances. Within its anniversary 250th season, the Bolshoi Theater for the first time went to Istanbul with a large-scale tour. They're delicately combining traditions and developing new tracks. The theater represents the Russian art at the leading international platform while still being a center of world's music culture. This year, the list of productions was updated and expanded, both in Russia and had a tour both in Russia and abroad. Now I am prepared to answer your questions. We're quite short of time today. Please, the international affairs. Good afternoon. Here's my question. The General Secretariat said that Zelensky wishes to have a deal in Ukraine. In your opinion, is this statement sincere? within the context that we have, we regularly inform the U.S. representatives about inadmissibility of providing Kiev with reconnaissance data. We know that armed forces of Ukraine target Russian facilities on the Russian territory, including civilian. I have to say that the response to our demarches, the U.S. side usually keeps silence or just does not provide substantial information. But this is a very relevant issue. Is RIA Novosti with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have one question, if I may. What can you say about the outcomes of the EU summit of March 19th in Brussels? If this event caught your eye, on March 19th, the session of the European Council yet again confirmed the anti-Russian approach, but not only the countries themselves, but only the regimes that are established there. The joint statement published following it on behalf of 25 member states are full of EU propaganda and Russian stamps, or memes, if I may say. Instead of looking for possibilities for diplomatic solutions, the aggressive European majority is still focused on building up efforts to support the Kiev regime and to torpedo initiatives, as we saw from this event aimed at peaceful settlement of the conflict. Under the pretexts of the existential threat coming from Russia, the European Council confirmed their wish to increase their defense capabilities by 2030. However, bureaucrats in Brussels keep silence that they do that at the expense of decreasing other budgetary means. First of all, that go for social matters. Probably they think that they can insult in other ways their own people. But this will end up in certain sentiment in their own country. But what will be the way out? Bucha on the European continent. But all their actions will be paid for by the future generations of Europeans. As to the situation in the Persian Gulf, the leaders of the EU managed to agree upon only a statement with a number of critical statements against Iran. On the example of the developments in the Middle East, the inability to act of the EU is not only clear, but it is outrageous. We took note on the call on of the European Council to respect the right of nations for self-determination and ensuring the freedoms of navigation. That's what they remembered finally. The EU showed their nature. When it came to Greenland, they remembered about the UN Charter in all its interconnectedness and entirety. But when it came to Crimea and other new Russian regions, when they made their own choice within the existing legal framework, this topic was a taboo for the EU. The same applies to the freedom of
and ensuring the passage of their own vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, while simultaneously using force to restrict the movement of vessels carrying cargo in the interests of our country. So That was the topic for the recent European Council as well. Not developing some strategy, no breakthrough decisions adopted, just a lack of goodwill and silliness. And that was their helplessness, their own helplessness, popular statements about unbalancing the energy markets and decreasing energy prices. So what they banned for themselves to buy energy resources from one of the most main suppliers, Russia, they did not think about it. They did not think about correcting the European emissions trading systems for greenhouse gases in order to somehow decrease the burden of energy enterprises. So their purpose is economizing energy, but not reasonable, but what is the result of their recklessness, their own recklessness? And the desire of the Europeans to impose their notorious green standards on everyone. It's just double standards. When Brussels is undermining European energy security itself, destroying it, it's just their green agenda. And such measures could have not cosmetic effect, but some illusionary effect. When the energy has been turned into some Achilles heel for the European Union. I do not know how to name it. They are not ready for actions. It has become a really complex situation for them. So, hello, Madam Zakharova, is Vestia here? How can you comment on the Israeli ambassador interview, where he mentioned a unilateral official stance of Russia contrasting with the level of cooperation of our country? So I would be surprised if our position would be bilateral, because our country has its position. It's the position of the country, not a side to the conflict, but a country, where the approach is formed, and it's important to underline that. Yes, I have seen that interview at your media outlet. Yes, it's necessary to underline that the position is based on facts. It's not just today's situation. It's a balanced position based on facts, with the understanding of the historical process and with the analysis of what will happen in the future. Yes, we have started the mentioned interview. Yes, of course, the fact is stated that Russia and Israel are linked with friendly relations. Yes, we will not argue that. We value them, and we seek to develop them, relations between the leaders of our country. A trusting political dialogue, it is maintained, and we share those assessments, of course. And against this background, the statements by the ambassador allegedly about the unilateral position of Moscow on the situation in the Middle East. As our assessments are well balanced and they are not biased but based on facts and foreign policy analysis. But such public assessments of his hosting country position by the ambassador, it's not about contributing to strengthening friendly ties. Thank you to you. Is Sputnik Japan with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova, good evening. Sputnik Tokyo, Dmitry Gavrilov. I have a question. Recently, Japanese media have reported that Japanese authorities are considering purchasing Ukrainian-made drones to strengthen the country's defense capabilities. How would you comment on this information? Thank you. You know, such reports, especially if they are confirmed, further testify to the fact that Tokyo is increasingly involved in military cooperation with the Kiev regime that is openly demanding weapons for the Ukrainian armed forces in exchange for drones. Clearly that is bringing the peaceful resolution even further. And any attempts by the Japanese authorities to establish shipments of weapons, lethal weapons, to the Kiev regime will be considered hostile actions against our country, and the retaliatory measures will follow. Thank you. Is Xinhua with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Xinhua agency here. Recently, the United States of America has said that the American armed forces must control space. It indicates U.S. intentions to deploy weapons in outer space, and China consistently opposes the militarization of space. How do you assess U.S. actions in this area, and does this pose a security threat to international community? Yes, I would like to clarify. Will the United States control, according to those statements, the entire space or some part of it? Yes, it's a rhetorical question. Actually, we have commented in detail this U.S. statement on the 19th of March. They are becoming increasingly aggressive, and officials in Washington openly declare their intention to secure military dominance in near-Earth space. It's a rapidly deteriorating situation in space security, growing threat of space becoming an arena for armed confrontation. We are convinced that any armed conflict in orbit would have catastrophic consequences for the long-term sustainability of space activities and the prospects for space exploration for all states without exception. And at the same time, let us not just make some preliminary statements, but it will depend much on coordinated actions by the international community. Initiative to prevent arms race is very much in demand, and developing legally binding instruments and the Chinese-Russian draft treaty on the prevention of the placement of weapons in outer space and the threat or use of force against outer space objects. It could be a basis for that. We will continue constructive efforts to strengthen space security in close coordination with the People's Republic of China, among others. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Reuters with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova. It's about the connection. Yes, we are here. We have two questions about the freedom of navigation, and I will just ask them one after another. Last Friday, it was reported that the French Navy detained the oil tanker sailing under the Mozambican flag in the Mediterranean Sea. The ship was called Dana. How does the Russian Foreign Ministry assess such actions against merchant shipping? And quite recently, Nikolai Patrushev, in an interview with Kommersant, said that Russia could consider escorting ships, vessels, if additional threats appear posed by European states, could consider additional measures. Could you clarify what are those measures and how are they developed? So let me start replying from the beginning. Recently, we have repeatedly commented on such controversial actions by Western states. On the 23rd of March, we published a detailed and comprehensive statement by the Russian Foreign Ministry in that respect. We think that such actions are unacceptable, impermissible, and gross violation of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. We will use all the tools we have, legal tools, in order to ensure the respect for the principle of freedom of navigation. And those who intend to transform the Baltic Sea into, in brackets, internal water, a quotation for NATO and the EU, such measures will not go unanswered, and we will use all the available means. So we support the 1982 Convention, resist to neo-colonial dictatorship, and stand for the unification in order to protect the legitimate interests of maritime carriers. So we think it's unacceptable to turn the maritime space into a zone of confrontation, and actually to return to piracy, but at a new technological level. So why has the international community worked so hard on preserving the international regulation? Why have so many resources been spent in order for the maritime space to be regulated, when it's possible like that just to remember about pirates' tricks of 300 years ago, but in new technological harpoons to seize vessels, to rob them and to destroy them, and so on. Yes, that's the case, but we have the film of Pirates of the 21st Century, but it's some prophecy. It's symbolic, actually. We thought it's absurd, but it's a new reality. Now about the interview by Nikolai Patrushev. An emphasis was made in that interview on political and diplomatic means widely used by our country to counter illegal actions by EU members. They are not always effective. It's obvious in that regard the competent authorities have developed and implement a whole range of appropriate actions. Specifically, measures are being envisaged to escort Russian-flagged vessels, and the special measures to install protective equipment on board vessels and other measures, but I will not go into detail here because it's not my scope, but any unfriendly measure will meet with a proportionally strong response. We have the necessary means and capabilities available. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Town News with us? Yes. Hello, Madam Zakharova. Hello. Town News Information Agency, Georgia. First of all, I would like to thank President Putin of the Russian Federation, Russian Orthodox Church, and the people of Russia for honoring the memory of our beloved Patriarch Ilya II, and the participation of Special Representative of the President of the Russian Federation for International Cultural Cooperation, Mikhail Shvydkoy, in the farewell ceremony for Catholicos Patriarch of Georgia. And those condolences were perceived as a significant, friendly, and symbolic signal. What do you think will be further practical and diplomatic impetus? In your opinion, what could follow such steps? And following up on your statement at the previous briefing that the ball is not in Russia's court, what actions on the part of Georgia could further this impetus? Actually, I would like to reply to your today question, and I have taken this homework from the previous briefing Yes, it was actually a deep grief in Russia, the death of a patriarch. He was a true spiritual leader, and he protected traditional values and Orthodox unity. So he was respected in the entire Christian world. You have enumerated the steps by the Russian authorities in order to convey officially our condolences to the people of Georgia. Regarding relations with Georgia, our peoples, I would repeat once again, are bound by the closest historical ties. Despite well-known political differences on some issues, we encourage the development of bilateral cooperation. It appears that the Georgian side is also interested in constructive relations with Russia. Interaction with our country is one of the key factors behind the unprecedented growth of the Georgian economy. I would emphasize that our ties with Georgia are natural and not artificially imposed by someone, and we do not allow to impose such approach on us by the West or by anyone else. So it's about economic interaction and people-to-people contacts. Russia is a key trading partner for Georgia in 2025. Yes, as I have promised. I took that data from experts. The trade turnover grew by 6%, reaching $2.7 billion. Russia accounts for 2/3 of Georgia's wine exports, 90% of fruit, 40% of lemonades and mineral water. This demonstrates that our capacious market remains Georgia's priority, and CIS countries account for 70% of Georgia's exports, many times more than the EU's share. Why I compare with the EU? It testifies about the lack of a clear result from the Georgia-EU Free Trade Agreement signed in 2014. It's just propaganda. It remains only propaganda. No one in Brussels intended to open their market to Georgian goods. But 12 years went by. What was the obstacle? It was only about words. Now they just offer to the region's countries, just distracting them from the truth, just showing them some destructive objects, and actually nothing happens. And Russia is a key supplier of strategically important goods to Georgia, energy and grain. The decisions adopted by our leadership in 2023, it was very important to resume direct flights and a visa-free regime for Georgian citizens. Today, the air flights are conducted in more than 20 directions, connecting 3 Georgian and 11 Russian cities. The tourist flow increased to 1.6 million people. Every 4th tourist in the Republic in Georgia is from Russia, and it's about the development of Georgian tourism industry and increasing the number of pilgrimages to Georgia. Russians travel there not for exotic things but to venerate Georgian holy sites. This will be further occasion to do that. It's one more eloquent testimony of common culture and history of the two people. We stand on the same spiritual foundation and defend the same values.
We're sincerely glad that the context between our two peoples and the economic cooperation is developing accordingly. Now on to political dialogue with Georgia. I can only repeat one thing. If Tbilisi is ready for that, Moscow will not avoid goal-oriented discussion. The rejection of dialogue with Russia, as well as tragic events of 2008, are a part of the heritage of a criminal and reckless regime of Saakashvili. It's rational to actually rationally justify the advantages of such an approach that Georgia used to take, and we hope that Tbilisi, realizing the true goals of the West in regards to the country, will understand that cooperating with Russia is better than confronting it, and this is a position that is backed by facts. And the challenges that our peoples, our countries have faced have become doubtlessly a very powerful provocation that has been prepared for a long time, and fortunately was stopped in its tracks, and it didn't go any further in the deepest part that it was prepared to serve by the West, not only for our country but the entirety of the region. The region is rich in natural resources and represents a unique geological and ecological point of the planet, possessing all types of natural riches, from resources to, of course, culture, history, art, etc. And you understand this always causes envy and desire to be destructive and inflict damage and unleash chaos and disorder. This is a desire of some select structures on our planet. Unfortunately, they do still exist. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is the Chinese media cooperation with us? Yes. We have two questions. You already answered one of them. Thank you very much. I'll answer the second question. Currently, on the island of Hainan, we have the Boao Asian Forum, where Russia is represented on a high level. Asia is currently being called locomotive of the global economic growth, with its role becoming more important than before. How does Russia view the multilateral cooperation with the Asian countries in the forming markets? What are the expectations of the Russian side in regards to the existing forum and the prospects of its development? In the current moment of geopolitical tension, we see the growing significance of dialogue structures helping reinforce regional cooperation and elaborate exact avenues of growing trade and economic cooperation. Among such formats are the Boao Asian Forum and the Eastern Economic Forum in Russia. They are depoliticized and representative and specially oriented towards the Asia-Pacific region, rich in history and tradition, and they are, of course, extremely effective. The organizers of the ongoing Asian Forum, Boao, are raising the topics concerning the relevant economic tendencies in the world. Especially, we see the discussion of digital economy and managing artificial intelligence, good environment for trade and investments, development of cross-border payment and electronic commerce. This is especially important for Russia because we are interacting both with our Chinese friends and other partners from Asia. We're interested in broadening our connection with the Chinese Forum. Representative of Russia is among the board of directors of the forum, and we will always be happy to host the Secretary General of the Boao Asian Forum, Chan Zun, at the Eastern Economic Forum. We also think it necessary to invite representatives of multilateral associations situated in Eurasia to such events. The forum is hosting the heads of executive authorities of some international structures such as ASEAN, SCO, CICA, the Asia Development Dialogue, Asia Cooperation Dialogue, and also these representatives are also visiting the Eastern Economic Forum, where we see the work conducted by the EU, APEC, and the SCATO. This also helps reinforce the context between the business circles of those countries. So we wish all the success and productive discussions at the Boao Asian Forum, and we also hope for broad representation at Eastern Economic Forum. Is Bolt News with us? Yes, good afternoon. in Lithuania, there was a cancellation of a singer and an ex-participant of the modern talking duo, Dieter Bohlen. I finally got this question. I hoped for us to discuss this question during the briefing. Let's talk about Dieter Bohlen at the briefing. Yes. Also, they cancelled the performance of Croatian violin player Stepan Hauser because he dared to perform Kalinka. Why are the Baltic states the most frequent suspects when Russian language is Russian culture is cancelled? And it is just puzzling to see when we see different people who are performing Tchaikovsky, Mussorgsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, and other composers, and it would be very terrible to see for everyone who knows who Vrubleva, Vysotsky, and other great painters are, who are familiar with the actions of Russian regimes, and who know about the theater of Stanislavski, smaller theater, and other our theaters. We're not even talking about the performers. We're talking about the Respublic regime, who is responsible for such commandments. They cannot, in reality, cancel anything. They change some logos, labels, and that's it. Then they run out of money, and they started to focus more on their real task at hand, trying to control the damage. Periodically, just resorting to some petty acts. What we are witnessing is just nationalism transforming into neo-Nazism. Thank you. Thank you. Is Lenta.ru with us? Now, yes, Madam Zakharova, we have on the 20th of March, the Parliament of Moldova adopted a resolution condemning the so-called pollution of the Dniester River as a result of the armed forces of Russian Federation strike against the Ukrainian infrastructure. According to the document, a lot of oil products have been discharged into the river, which created a serious threat for the health of the population, including the possible cancerogenic influence. How could you comment the adoption of this resolution by the Moldovan parliament? There's nothing to be surprised about. For many years, official Chisinau has been regularly accusing Russia of practically everything. Economic, financial problems, Russia is always to blame. The situation in the security sphere is aggravating. Moscow is to blame. Unfortunately, the demography is declining. Moscow is to blame too. Everything they are blaming on us. Now the environment is getting worse, and Moscow is also once again to blame. Even the Moldovan citizens themselves, they think that this is suspicious, and there are no clear circumstances described of this incident taking place, no credible evidence, but nevertheless it doesn't stop them from accusing Russia. It begs a question in regards to the sending of samples of the contaminated water for analysis for some reason to Bucharest. I don't know. Don't they have any laboratories in Moldova? Probably they do. Why sending the samples to Bucharest then? I don't know. Why are they doing that? It's obvious. And the very same day, on 20th of March, the Parliament of Moldova voted in favor of denouncing 3 basic CIS treaties. They just needed to mask this act by some other news story justifying the sudden denunciation of those documents. Another coincidence is the statement of Maria Zakharova, the President of Moldova, of March 23rd, regarding the feasibility of Moldova joining the so-called coalition of the willing. For Moldovans who are visiting Russia, who are working in Russia, who are witnessing good neighborly relations, how do you explain to them that suddenly you need to act against Russia, especially in that overt way, join something that, pardon my French, has clearly gotten stale, that has gone rotten. The worsening situation with the Dniester is another justification to justify their actions, having nothing to do with the well-being of the citizens. Exactly on the contrary, leading to the situation becoming worse. Please, News.ru. Yes, we have two questions today. How does Moscow evaluate the risk of possible occupation or blockade of the Kharg Island by the United States, which is a key node of exports of Iranian oil? What consequences for regional stability, global energy prices, and interests of Russia would this scenario entail? The worsening of the situation in the Middle East has already, as you know, I'm convinced that you're familiar with the numbers, has led to the rupture of 20% of all global shipments of hydrocarbons and fuel. We already mentioned that at the previous briefing, due to the significant damage of more than 40 facilities of fuel and energy infrastructure of the Persian Gulf countries and the practical blockade of the Hormuz Strait, the market daily is lacking 50 million barrels of oil and 4.5 million barrels of oil products. And according to the International Energy Agency, gas has increased in price by 85% in recent time and is currently trading around 600, 700 US dollars for 1 cubic meter. The Brent oil has increased in price by 54%, currently at level of $100 per barrel. Such significant and sudden growth in price of energy has led to the ramifications for the entirety of the manufacturing production chain. We also need to take into account the significant influence of the political events for the global prices. Against the backdrop of the significant growth in price hike of oil and gas, and due to the risk for the world economy, President Donald Trump has postponed his threat to damage Iranian energy system for 5 days. As we see, the prices have significantly decreased in the time, but then they have started raising back. We don't preclude any of the scenarios because we cannot really forecast any developments in the region and the reaction of markets. We call on the de-escalation. We also hear about the speculation about the so-called land operation in the Kharg Island, but hope this will not come to it because the results of the already accomplished facts are enough for us. And my second question: as a result of the standoff in the Middle East, the United States has to withdraw the personnel from the bases in the region. According to the media, recently the United States base was transferred from Baghdad to Jordan. How does the Russian MFA evaluate the evacuation of the American military bases from some Arab states? Will this positively influence the situation in the region? You know, we don't usually comment on the bilateral relations of two sovereign states, but we need to note that the current dramatic situation in the Persian Gulf are telling in saying that the presence of the United States Armed Forces in the region, instead of reinforcing security, creates additional threats for all countries of the region. Thank you very much. Is Newsfront with us? Yes, good afternoon. One question, if you allow me. How would you evaluate the new accusation raised against Russia that the main person to blame for the growth of migration to Europe in the last 10 years is the Russian President Vladimir Putin? This statement was made by the EU Commissioner on Internal Affairs and Migration, Magnus Brunner, in his interview to Financial Times. I'll just ask for clarification and just ask for we are being accused of worsening the environment in the